Shai Tamasi is a media personality in North America, presenting on Cityline, which streams into over 70 million homes. Originally from Israel and having served in the Israel Defense Forces, Shai now uses his platform to share the truth about Israel, even though he has sometimes had to pay a price for it. Shai came to a JTV event at Nottingham University, where we spoke about his own story and also discussed how he tackles the tough issues around Israel and Zionism. Let's go on to some difficult issues around Israel, because unfortunately we do need to recognise there is a big political element to it, and we need to be able to know how to deal with these kind of questions, because whether we like it or not, Israel is hotly discussed in a political manner around the world. So let's talk about the creation and the founding of Israel. There was some talk about choosing Uganda. It's quite funny, actually. I don't know if any of you have seen this. We actually posted this on JTV. The Ugandan president, at the time of, he went to mark the an anniversary for the Entebbe raid with Bibi Netanyahu in Uganda. And he was speaking and he said there was this strange fellow called Balfour, and the fellow wanted to make the state of, he was supporting creating the state of Israel in Uganda. So clearly this man is very, very ignorant.
Oh my goodness.
It was hysterical. But the question is basically what is the Jewish claim to the land of Israel? And is it, was it right for it to have been chosen as a Jewish home, given the the political issues around it?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction here. It wasn't chosen as a Jewish home; it was the Jewish home. Uganda wasn't chosen because it wasn't the Jewish home. There was another thought to have Alaska be the Jewish home, and that's not the Jewish home. The Jewish home, Israel is the indigenous home for the Jewish people. It always has been. It always will be. Do
you think you can make space for others within that as well?
Of course, and the kind of I guess the thing that I don't understand about people who come to me and say, well, how can you have the Jewish state be the Jewish state and then not have other people who have lived there be part of that Jewish state? Well, we're talking then about certain nation states. And if you look at most of Europe, if you look at Africa, if you look at Asia, if you look at most countries around the world, except for the New World, most are nation states of their indigenous people. That doesn't mean that other people don't live there and aren't equal citizens and aren't, fully supported in their lives there. But it's important to note, to say why not Uganda, why not Alaska? Well, that's not our home. That's colonized. That right there is colonizing. So people who say, Israelis or Jews are colonizing Israel is in fact a fallacy. Science proves, DNA proves the connection of the ethnic Jewish people
and archaeology as well.
Of course, I mean there's so much, but DNA is one of those things that you just cannot argue with. You cannot fabricate.
But what do you say with the fact that, okay, fine, Jews were living in the land of Israel 2,000 years ago. They've always lived there, at least a small part of the population throughout the last 2,000 years. They were exiled by the Romans, not of their choice. They had a nation state there beforehand. But other peoples have moved in there now, right? You've had Arabs living there for the last 1,000 years. And so what do you say to the point that okay, well they're there now. Jews haven't been there. Well, at least the majority of them haven't been there for a while. So it's fair game for them to say they should be able to have their an Arab state there, or at least part of the land should be an Arab state.
Well, they had that opportunity, didn't they? In 1948, the partition gave part of the land to the Arab residents and part of the land to the Jewish residents. It didn't. In fact, if you look at the original partition of the British Mandate included Transjordan at that time. So Transjordan at the very beginning was supposed to be the Arab state. Everything from the east of the river was the Arab state. Everything from the west of the state was the Jewish state. At the end of the day, we saw where it ended up. The Jews accepted what was given to them. There was no qualms about, we were just happy to be able to have part of our home back and have that right to self-determine.
But do you think there's a valid argument to saying, no, all of the land should be an Arab state, because the majority of the land was occupied by Arab people?
Okay, but then we must look at, why did the Jews leave? Was it of their own, wanting to do so? And I would then flip it back and say, well, can I then say all of the land can be Jewish? I mean, you can't, we have to understand.
You're saying there has to be a compromise.
There has to be a compromise, absolutely. And, the interesting thing about it is people don't think about this, but from 1948 to 1967, Israel had no control over what is now the West Bank or Gaza. Gaza. And the question that I always throw back to people is, well, why was a state never then created during that time?
Right.
Israel had no control over it.
Why do you think that was?
Listen, there are many different reasons as to people saying why it wasn't. A lot of the reason is that they had hoped that at the end of the day, the Jews at the end of the day would not be there. However it happened, through war, through whatever it was, the Jews were going to not be on the land. I don't want to speculate as to why they thought the Jews weren't going to be on the land. There are many speculations as to why. But I think to say that it had to be one or the other is completely disingenuous, and I think it's also wrong. It's favoring one over the other, and we can't.
Right. You had in 48 600,000 or so Palestinians displaced
Sure.
from their homes, right? You also had a similar number, if not slightly higher, of Jews that were expelled
900,000.
from 900,000
Yep.
Jews expelled from Arab lands
Sure.
in 48. So it was a mixed bag.
Yep.
How do you think, given the fact that we still have the refugee issue, what kind of solution do you see moving forward?
Let's be honest about something. So in 1948, when the partition happened and Israel did declare its independence, Israel never, and this is really important for everybody to understand here, never said to the Arab population, you must leave. Today we have 1.9 million Arab Israeli citizens.
So explain what happened with all these refugees.
With a lot of the refugees, they left because they didn't want to be in the Jewish state, and a lot of them were promised by different Arab armies around that they were going to, push the Jews into the sea, give it a week, 2, you'll be able to come back and everything will be fine. Of course, that never happened. If it was truly a peaceful solution that they were looking for, really a peaceful solution, the Arabs who were in what was then declared as Israel should have stayed in Israel as peaceful Israeli citizens as we have today.
Right.
I mean, there are Arab citizens today who serve in the IDF, there are Arab citizens today who sit on the Supreme Courts, they're fully equal citizens to every Jew. And it could have been those same people who were there then. They made the decision. Now, I can't say that's everybody. Of course, there was a war because the Arabs declared war on Israel after. So, of course, there was fighting, and of course, people were displaced because of that. But had that fighting not broken out, I don't think we would be sitting here today.
Right, right. Can you explain now, I mean, I think that one of the key messages that we've taken from this is there needs to be a compromise, basically. Sure. And I think it's fair to argue that there's been a constant willingness. There's certainly been a rigorous defense on the Israeli side, but there's been a constant willingness to say we'll accept a Palestinian state, but we also need a Jewish state as well. And there has not been that among the leadership on the other side for the last 70 years. You're telling me you think it is not a valid argument. You don't see any validity in saying the whole land should become a Palestinian state.
Of course not.
Of course not.
Of course not. I mean, there's no historical basis for that. To call it a Palestinian, let's understand.
You do for some of the land.
Okay. I think that it's really important that we kind of words matter when we're talking about Israel, and I think words matter in general. I think when we're talking, right? I think that the important thing to understand is we're so comfortable nowadays using the terms Palestinian to define a people that we have to understand that pre-1948, if you look, we are so lucky nowadays. You can Google anything nowadays. Plus, you can also go to a library and you can kind of research stuff. It's so easy to find information about what was before. The term Palestinian before 1948 predominantly, not completely, but predominantly referred to the Jewish population and not the Arab population.
There was a Palestinian football team that was made up of Jews.
Correct. It was 100% Jewish. Right. I mean, these are of course, there were some who considered themselves to be Palestinian, but majority identified as Arabs. Yeah. That's exactly it. And the reason that they identified as Arabs, and I also want to preface by saying that I'm not just saying these things because I'm saying these things. One of my very, very, very dearest friends, who is also my, he came to he's been to my family abroad, and wonderful, wonderful man. His father is the Mukhtar, which is like the mayor of Kfar Idna, which is a Palestinian village in the West Bank, which is now the West Bank. And he would always preface and kind of sit down with me and say, listen, he said, there's stuff going on back and forth. He said, I grew up here during the entire history of what you are now learning about. I witnessed it, I watched it. The things that, kind of the way that everything is happening right now has become so polarized. And I think that it's become so polarized in a sense that we're allowing social media and we're allowing kind of people who don't really have a strong base and factual knowledge about what it is that they're talking about to be almost experts about the topic that they really know nothing about.
Right.
And because social media gives a platform to anybody who wants a platform, this almost sense of, well, he said it, he must know what he's talking about. I mean, he has a YouTube channel. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just gives a little bit of validity to something that doesn't necessarily need to have validity. And I think that it would be very wise on both sides if we all just stop for a second and say, listen, the facts on the ground are this. This is where we are, this is what has happened, this is what needs to happen. From 1948 to 1967, had a peaceful state been declared, we wouldn't be talking about borders today. The reason that we're talking about borders today is because we've now understood that the borders that were at the beginning were non-defensible. That's why we're talking about land swaps and borders and
Right, so can you explain why in 1967, what happened and why is there still an Israeli presence in the West Bank?
So, like I said, from 1948 to 1967, Israel had absolutely not one person in the West Bank or in Gaza. In 1967, all the Arab armies surrounding Israel, so we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Syria, mobilized their troops to attack Israel. And the idea is that altogether they want to come together and go back to that premise from 1948, we're going to wipe all the Jews out and push them into the sea. It didn't happen. Israeli intelligence, if you agree at nothing else about Israel, Israeli intelligence is, I like to say, the best in the world, but if it's not the best in the world, it's one of the best in the world. And Israeli intelligence has always been that because of the need for us to be that. And we knew that it was happening. Israel was able to then attack first. And a lot of people will tell you, well, no, Israel didn't attack first. 100% Israel did attack first after finding out that the troops were mobilizing. Right. Now, the interesting thing is years later, Nasser then admitted at the UN that, in fact, that's what was going to happen. A lot of people don't like to talk about that because it changes the narrative of, well, Israel attacked first. Israel knew what it was doing. And unfortunately, sometimes in a climate like that, especially when you have hostile countries around you, which is sometimes hard for the Europeans to understand because it's so friendly here, you have to be able to do things like that. So they attacked, Israel attacked, and of course there was a war. What had happened is Israel won the war in 6 days. The Arab armies were not prepared for the preparedness of Israel and winning the war. That goes to what I was saying before, is Israel then understood, because of all the lives lost, on both sides, but the Israelis understood that the challenges that they had in that war were challenges that they would have the rest of their lives if the borders stayed the way that they were. And that's why Israel needed to have some sort of a presence in the West Bank. There is not one Israeli that I know of, that I can think of, that I could possibly even think of, that would want to control another population ever. That's not the point of Israel being in the West Bank. The point of Israel being in the West Bank is security-based, 100% solely, that is it. Now, today, we look at the settlements and we look at things. There are certain facts on the ground now that we have to work around, and that is a fact on the ground that is now a fact because of 1948 to 1967, nothing happened. I also want to mention the fact that between those years, the land was not Palestine. There was no Palestine. It was Jordan. Jordan took over the West Bank, illegally, by the way, took over the West Bank and occupied it. So what are we talking about when we talk about, taking the land from, who did we take it from? So we took it from Jordan. Should we give it back to Jordan? Is it part of Jordan? I think Israel might be okay with it. We're friendly with Jordan. We understand what the security deal is with Jordan. That might be something that's going to help, but that's not what Jordan is about now. Jordan has their country. Egypt has theirs, who has control of Gaza, and now Israel is left to deal with this mess.
But there is a religious settlement movement which is saying we actually want to have control. We do want to have control of the West Bank. There is. There's a difference between the state of Israel and the land of Israel. So those are two different terms. The state of Israel is the political, what we understand in the modern world as the state of Israel. The land of Israel is the Jewish tie. This also goes back to the whole argument of Jews don't have ties or Jews never had ties to Israel. There's a very big movement in the U.S. and of course here in the U.K. of Torah Jews, I think it's called, or true Jews, who believe that the land of Israel is the land of Israel. It's a very, very small minority. It's tiny,
very small.
tiny, tiny.
It's very small, and I mean, anybody who quotes them would do themselves a very great favor to also look in what they believe in terms of women's rights and education and things like that. You're quoting people who are not the most socially aware, but people don't want to look at that. They just want to look at, this fits my narrative, and they look Jewish. So
I think the other point to bear in mind is that even if you have Jewish people living in the West Bank, you should be able to have Jews living in a Palestinian state.
Well, you would think so, right?
But they don't seem to want that.
Listen. There's never been kind of like a secret about the fact that the Palestinian state is supposed to have no Jews. Only lately have they said, oh, well, we'd be okay with having it. But I agree with you. We have 1.9 million Israeli Arabs. Why can't Jews live in a future Palestinian state? What
would you say that on the reverse, though? You could say, yeah, but that's not quite fair argument because Palestinians living in the West Bank don't have the right to go and create a settlement somewhere in Israel.
Well, but you have Palestinians who live in the West Bank are not Israeli. So let's differentiate between Israeli citizens, Jewish Israeli citizens, Arab Israeli citizens, whatever you are, you're an Israeli citizen. You're first and foremost an Israeli citizen, and then you are who you are. Israel is a democracy and an open society. Palestinians who live in the West Bank are not Israeli citizens. They are Palestinian under their own government, by the way, that have elections-ish, what is it, 14 years now in the 4-year term? So yes, they have struggles, and I feel for them, and these are struggles that need to be dealt with. But the way that to be dealt with is not to come into a sovereign country and say, well, now I want to take your land.
Often one of the things people talk about is that Palestinians, when traveling into Israel, they experience a security barrier and checkpoints.
Sure.
And we often see images of, the border wall fence. Can you explain, why was that created? How does that impact the population?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we in Israel had a very hard time with the Intifada. And for those of you who don't know the Intifada, it was an armed uprising where attacks, terror attacks on Israeli populations, on Israeli civilians were happening. And we had to come up with a way in which we could secure Israelis. And, the security wall that's built was something that neither Israelis nor Arabs wanted. And I want to make that point because it's not something that anybody is championing. The numbers speak for themselves, sadly. Beforehand, there were whatever the numbers were of terror attacks. Since that wall has been built, 97% of terror attacks have stopped. So for someone to say to me, well, it's not fair, it divides, it creates a divide, well, yes, but at the end of the day, it's also saving 97% of people who were being killed before. So if security is, if Jewish lives, securing Israeli lives, I should say, because that wall secures everybody in Israel, not only Jewish lives, it is, if that offends you, well, then I'm sorry that Jewish lives offend you.
It's an important point because often Palestinian terrorism doesn't actually distinguish between Israeli Jews and Arabs.
Well, look at what happened yesterday. Hamas sent a rocket. The man who was killed in Ashkelon was from Hebron. He was a Palestinian from Hebron. Yeah. So it's not about distinguishing.
No, it's tragic.
Right? Yeah.
Let's quickly. I'm going to go to the audience soon, but let's quickly talk about the status of minority groups in Israel because I know that's something that you're particularly passionate about.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how the Israeli government treats minority groups.
I think that Israel is a great example of how in such a short amount of time, the modern state of Israel, how in such a short amount of time, you can really create something from that was very instilled in who we were 70 years ago and look at it now and we are completely the opposite. Now, to say that Israel is 100% perfect when it comes to social rights and things like that, no, but I don't know any country that is. Specifically for me, I like to speak about the LGBT rights because I am LGBT. I remember growing up, especially in the 90s in Israel when LGBT rights were, people didn't, it wasn't that it wasn't there, but it was just kind of an unspoken, do your own thing quietly, almost like a don't ask, don't tell, if you will. And nowadays, people, each year when I go back, sometimes I have the opportunity, and this last year I did, which was a great opportunity, to take media people with me, because I work in media. And I like them to be able to turn off CNN, turn off BBC, and just come and tour with me, do what I do, go see my family, go see whatever, go to the beach, do whatever it is that we do. And just kind of give them a way to look at it, not through television. And it's always such an amazing thing for me to see when people say to me, we never thought that, LGBT rights or LGBT lives here were so open and so free. The The lovely women who were on the trip with me, most of them who were heterosexual, said to me, I think Tel Aviv is like the gay Mecca. And it just, sometimes it feels like that, not because, you know, it's predominantly gay, but because there's this openness about it doesn't matter, nobody cares. You know, I marched in the first gay pride parade in Tel Aviv in 1998, and I can remember what it was versus what it is today. And we have come such a long way. You know, Israel has a lot of challenges. It does. We can't say it doesn't, but it is the one place in the Middle East for sure that, you know, is a refuge for so many. And I think that it's important to be able to acknowledge that without, you know, feeling as though you need to not acknowledge the challenges that we do still have.
Do you think there's a case to be made that Arabs feel treated as second-class citizens in any respect in Israel?
You know, legally, they're not. Legally, Arabs are 100% equal citizens. Now, we are still in living memory of the establishment of the State of Israel. There are still Arab families who have grandfathers and fathers who were there during that time. There's still sentiment in Israel. There's bad sentiment.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that there isn't. So
otherwise, it's not institutional, but there's some kind of cultural underpinnings.
Correct. I mean, there is, like I said, you know, we have Supreme Court justices, IDF officers, people who are sitting in our Knesset. There's the Joint List, who is the third largest party in the Knesset today in Israel. The third largest party. That's a big deal. That is comprised of Palestinian Arabs who daily call for the destruction of Israel. They are 100% equal. They are there. They are paid by my taxes. They're there because minorities are accepted in Israel as 100% equal Israeli citizens.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's really, really important to note. I also think the other thing that's interesting is that you have anti-Israel LGBT groups. You know, gays for Hamas and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you say to those groups?
I mean, gays for Hamas to me is almost like, I don't know, like vegetarians for meat. It's the most bizarre thing to me. If this is where ignorance comes in, because if you're championing, if what your passion is you're championing Palestinian rights, and you should, and people should, then you know, do that, absolutely. But to side with a group, a specific group, which is Hamas, which is a globally recognized terror organization that has, in the paper, been, and on the news, has openly said they do not accept homosexuals. They have dragged homosexuals on the back of their motorbikes dead in their bodies in the streets because they are gay. This is not, you have to be completely ignorant of what you're talking about to be able to say that I am LGBT and I support Hamas.
Well, luckily there aren't any ignorant people in the world, so that's fine.
I know, right? I'm really lucky.
I also think that just one point I wanted to come back to about the whole issue of there might be some cultural issues between Jews and Arabs, even if it's not institutional. I think it's always important to sort of, as you kind of did, just have a bit of perspective on that, given the fact that, you know, there's been all this conflict, that Israel's felt so threatened, vulnerable, and surrounded by, you know, had all these conflicts. I think when you put that in perspective and then look at the status of, you know, Israeli cohesion among different groups, I think it's quite remarkable.
Oh, listen, if you go to Israel, if you have the opportunity to go and you have the opportunity to experience Israel again, not through a political lens, rather through just going as you would to go to any other country and just experience it as a person and experience it, then I say absolutely go and do it, because that oftentimes really answers the question as to what is true and what is not. You're living it, you're seeing it, you're witnessing it with, you know, with your own eyes. It's upsetting to me today that we have to be able to uplift and give a voice to these amazing, brave Arab Israelis who travel the world speaking for Israel and saying, listen, what you guys are hearing is wrong. I'm Bedouin, I'm Palestinian, I'm Lebanese, I'm whatever I am, and I live in Israel as an equal citizen. People, I watch the videos, and people are still unwilling to listen to what they have to say. So, you know, I mean...
Well, they say, when we get it on our channel, we have a video with a Muslim Zionist, and they, literally the comments beneath are, this is a paid actor. You know, one comment was, this video was posted 2 weeks ago, is this guy still alive?
Oh my God. I mean, see, but we laugh about that, but that's a sad thing.
I know.
Is he still alive?
It's
because
humor.
Well, yes, no, but that's the thing. Is he killed in his home? There's a Likudnik. So Likud is a right-wing government in Israel. His name escapes me now, and I apologize, but he is an adamant Likudnik. He's pro-Netanyahu, who not even I am pro-Netanyahu that much, and he completely is. He was on the news when I go back every summer. Like I say, I spend the summers at home with my family, and he was on the news, and his story was just so upsetting. His entire village just completely excommunicated him, not for any other reason. And it wasn't that he was living in a village that was one of the poorer villages. It was a well-to-do village. They had money. People were well off. Most of them worked in Israel. No problem, but no, because of the underlying stigma to supporting Israel, he was excommunicated. Right. And it's just sad.
It really is. Let's go to the audience now. If you have a question, please just raise your hand. You can ask Shai whatever you want, challenge him on any issues that you feel about with regard to Israel and Palestine. And
I see one there.
Thank you. In your opinion, is there a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? And if there is, what is it? And if there's not, why not?
Okay, so that's an excellent question.
Discuss.
Discuss, yeah. So anti-Zionism is completely a new brand of anti-Semitism, in my opinion. And I say that because if we understand Zionism to be what Zionism truly is, and not what people have skewed it to be.
Well, define it. Go on.
Let's define it. So Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their indigenous homeland. That's all it is. Nothing more, nothing less. If you are against Jewish people being able to self-determine themselves in their homeland, you are anti-Semitic. Why? Because if you are allowing other peoples, other nations, other ethnicities, that right, but say Jews can't, that in and of itself is anti-Semitism. So it's a very simple equation. Now, the world today, unfortunately, has taken the term Zionism and skewed it into, I mean, I've heard things, it's colonialism and it's racism and it's all these horrible things that it has nothing to do with. It is simply the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, not the right of the Jewish people to self-determination over somebody else, not the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in somebody else's home, none of that. It's asking for Jewish people to be able to govern themselves. And if you don't agree with that, if you say Jews, you cannot have that, well then yes, you're anti-Semitic.
One point that I also find interesting is when I discuss this with people and I say, I think generally speaking, it is anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist. Sure. People often respond by saying, so what about those Jews who are anti-Zionist? You think they're anti-Semitic? Are they self-hating Jews? And what I say in response is, well, the reason why you have some very small minority, again, of religious Jews who are, the vast majority of religious Jews are Zionists,
sure.
But the reason why they believe that they're against the state of Israel is because they think that Jews don't have a religious right to establish a state of Israel until the Messiah arrives. Right. So they believe we have a religious duty to, in a sense, be prejudiced towards ourselves. So in other words, to withhold a right from ourselves. So in a sense, yes, they just think it's a religious duty to be so, and it's quite nuanced in their case. I think for other people where they don't have that context, I still would say in their instance, you are withholding a right from the Jewish people. But
well, I that goes back to what I was saying before about those smaller minorities when it comes to or research what they feel about women's rights, research what they feel about education. I would always implore you guys to ask, if someone says to you, "I'm a religious Jew, I'm against the state of Israel," I put it out there to you. Your next question should be, what do you believe is going to happen in Israel after the Messiah comes? That should be your next question, because you'd be very interested to find out that they will tell you, well, we believe that all the non-Jews will be kicked out or killed and it'll be a Jewish state. So it's not
go that far, but yes, effectively, they'd say that'd be a Jewish state. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, the Niturei Karta and some Satmar, which is a little bit more of an extremist, they do believe that if you don't convert or if you don't become Jewish, then there's no place for you in what will be the Israel that after the Messiah comes. So basically, they're a lot more extremist. But what people are doing is picking and choosing the parts that work for the narrative today, and not really thinking about, wait, who are these people though? What do we know about them? Let's look at who these people are. And you might agree with it or you might not, but I always like to say, ask the question, what do you believe is going to happen after?
Right, that's really, really important points. Next question, any other questions? Yeah, I think that's all.
See a gentleman there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sam. So as someone who works in the media and someone who's obviously quite prominent in the media, I'd like to know your thoughts on the media's representation of actually what's gone on in Israel the past few days. I've actually looked at different headlines from different news sources, and some of them miss out the fact that Hamas obviously fires a lot of rockets first, and they say that Israel's firing back is more of a bigger issue. How much of the media's influence do you think is changing people's minds? And also, do you think that the media is wrong, or should they continue to sort of try and be even-handed, even sometimes when it's actually not?
I appreciate that question. This is a challenge that I have every day, really, every day, kind of, in what I do and with what I do. I think generally, kind of a broad stroke, and this is a very broad stroke, so I'm not saying everybody's exactly the same, but the media in general, especially Western media, tends to be a little bit more liberal in their political views. So there was a very interesting lecture given by, do you guys know who Alan Dershowitz is? Most of you, yes. So Alan Dershowitz, for those of you who don't know, is a prominent lawyer in the U.S. He was, a very big supporter of the Clintons. He identifies as a Democrat. He's come under some bad press now lately because he's always willing to challenge people who will simply brush a stroke about Donald Trump without saying, why. He'll say, well, okay, let's look at the devil's advocate kind of side of it, and that has given him a little bit of bad press. But he made a very interesting comment one time, and he said that oftentimes with media, it's not necessarily about who's right or who's wrong. It's about who the underdog is. So it could be the right, it could be wrong. It's about who seems that they don't have the power to up over the other person. And the reality is Israel is a stronger force than the PA. And the media sometimes looks at that as, well, let's talk the meat and the potato of the stories. In media, if you know anything about media, is what sells. Sadly, it's a horrible thing to say. I hate saying it, but it's what sells. If the pictures of horrible things happening around the world will always get clicks before some I don't know, whatever, a warm fuzzy kind of story. That's just the way we as humans are. We are intrigued by, sadly, sometimes things that shock us, and the media knows that, and the media works that way. I think that in the last years, I think that, we've maybe come a little bit better, but I still think we are so far from, the media used to be, journalism used to be, who, what, where, when, why, how, done. There's no leaning, there's no my thoughts on it unless it was an opinion piece, there's none of that. Today...
That sounds like a utopia.
What, right? I mean, it does sound like a utopia, but today you can say this, this CNN leans this way, Fox leans this way, this leans this way, this leans, and it shouldn't be that. And that's a problem in media, and I think we have to do better. I say it as somebody who, I don't work in that part of media, I don't work in journalism, but as somebody who kind of looks at it and is a little bit closer to it, we have to do better. I agree we have to, and I think it should go back to, these are the facts. You are here to make your own opinion about it when I give you the facts. So I think that there's something we need to work on, but unfortunately it's kind of what sells.
I also think the other point that's worth mentioning is that we do root for the underdog.
Yeah.
The underdog doesn't necessarily always have the moral superiority.
But that's what I mean.
Which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the other point is, that's point number one. Another point is that there's also, Israel in another sense is an underdog when you look at the wider context of the Middle East. So there's different ways of looking at it.
100%, but people tend not to look at the wider scale.
Yeah.
They like to compartmentalize it and say, and that's a shame, because I think they should really look at it, it's not, Israel, I mean, yes, Israel, when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians, yes, Israel is kind of the superior in terms of force. But if you look at tiny little Israel compared to the rest of the Middle East, is nothing.
I think people underestimate how much Jewish people and Israelis feel vulnerable. I think people really underestimate how we feel Israel is in a very sensitive position. We have Iran, we have other threats, we've got threats from Lebanon, and et cetera, et cetera.
I agree.
And we also know, and when we know that we have a very unsupportive media and protests, and you have a rise in anti-Semitism whenever Israel engages in a conflict in Gaza, and who knows when the next time that's going to happen, they don't realize how vulnerable and how much we feel Israel is fragile, and how desperately we feel we need it given our painful history.
Well, so let's just give a little bit of historical fact here, and this is a fact. I mean, you guys can research this. Jews are the most persecuted people in the entire world historically.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
So, think back, before 1948, I mean, we were always the underdog. And there is something really disheartening to me that people are so upset with the fact that Jews are no longer the underdog when it comes to Israel.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you know, they don't know how to digest that, and it comes back in ways that, you know, it comes back in really bad ways. It comes back mostly in anti-Semitism, but in ways that are so completely extreme and out of the ordinary in terms of the way that you would think people would react to another people.
Yeah, it's funny. They said Jews go back to Palestine before 48, and now they say Jews leave Palestine, go back to Poland.
Right? It's
you know, it's messy. It's very messy, and I also think that a lot of the reasons why Europe in particular can be quite viciously anti-Israel is because it can free them from a lot of their guilt that they feel from the Holocaust. I think. Well, I think that's an interesting psychological perspective. It's something that I feel. Yeah. I think there is an element of by pointing our finger at Israel and saying you're baby killers, we can remove ourselves of a certain feeling of guilt.
That's actually, you know, that's actually a good point. I mean, I've never thought about it. That was actually a great point. That's actually a great point.
Next question.
So, do you think the issue with potentially a Palestinian democratic state occurring, which would be the only one in the Middle East if it was created?
An Arab state.
Yeah, an Arab state. Would be that the other Arab nations are worried because they're all essentially dictatorships?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I've never really sat and thought about it. As I'm sitting here and thinking and hearing you say it, I think that that's actually a great point. I mean, you know, so many of the countries in the Middle East really run and rule on the fact that they have their ruling powers, the ruling families, the ruling kind of monarchies, that it might be something really unsettling for, you know, for many of them. I mean, we look at the Arab Spring, and again, the Arab Spring, such a good idea. Such a, you know, I really rooted for these countries who were going to uprise and kind of overthrow the dictators and champion democracy. Sadly, we saw where that came. I mean, most of them quashed it. Most of them, you know, it really didn't evolve into anything that was fruitful. And I think that, I don't know, I mean, I don't know that, you know, a Palestinian state in particular is going to do that. I think there's going to be so many challenges before we get to that democracy that you're talking about in a Palestinian state. I can't, right now, with the current PA government, see how that would even be, I don't see that happening. So a law would have to happen before it became a democratic state. So I think it's a good point. I do. I think it's a good point, and it's something that I hadn't thought about, so I appreciate you giving me food for thought.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions.
Let's see, young lady here.
I really appreciate that you mentioned that you like to state facts and argue with facts, and I like that as well, and I agree with you on that point. So I just wanted... okay, I have a question, but before that, I just want to respond to the conversation you guys were having. Sure. You previously mentioned that the purpose of the military occupation in the West Bank is 100% for security. However, there's like rapidly increasing settlements there, which you said were not against international law, which I disagree with, but what is the security purpose of having these settlements, first of all? Second of all, I just want to ask you about Gaza. So,
sorry?
Gaza, also known as Gaza. So, as you said, Israel does this 100% for security and to protect itself from Hamas. So, let's look at the facts once again. Why does Israel kill so many civilians, hundreds of thousands of civilians?
Well, not hundreds of thousands, but okay.
Sorry?
Not hundreds of thousands, but...
Well, look at Operation Protective Edge.
Hundreds of thousands?
It's above 1,000, but it's not hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah, not hundreds of thousands. That facts are important. I'm just saying facts are important. Yeah, okay.
Sorry about that. I still think it's very terrible to kill 2,000 people because every life is valuable equally.
Yep.
Every Jewish and Palestinian life is equally valuable. 2,000 lives were lost. Many of them were civilians. Many of them were children. Almost half the population of Gaza is children, 800,000. Why is Israel, with its high technology and high defense system, killing all these civilians and these children if they're trying to protect themselves from Hamas? If you look at the Great March of Return recently, Operation Protective Edge, other than Operation Protective Edge, the Great March of Return, one of the higher up IDF soldiers said, we know where every bullet lands. So clearly Israel knows where its bullets are landing, and when they land on paramedics and when they land on innocent civilians. How do you think that justifies the claim that Israel 100% just wants to defend its security?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. I want to start by saying, first of all, I absolutely agree with you. Every life is important. Gazan, Israeli, whatever, it does not matter. A life is a life, and that is important. I think it's very also important to understand the, let's look a little bit into the history of Gaza, the situation in Gaza right now. Let's look at from 2005 on. I won't go super far back, but from 2005 on. And the reason I say 2005 on, my parents, are in living memory of a time when they could go to Gaza, and they had friends who lived in Gaza, and they would go to their house for Saturday. They would have coffee and stuff like that. It was that type. Yes, Israel was controlling it, but it was the civilian population in Gaza and the civilian population in Israel was not like what it is today. I preface by saying that because when Israel did disengage in 2005, it's really important to remember that there was no blockade from 2005 to 2007. And what changed in 2007? Hamas was democratically elected. That is when all of a sudden a blockade came into effect because Hamas, they were caught shipping weapons through seaports. And that is when Egypt and Israel, by the way, put the blockade in because of security reasons. Now, Hamas is, and I can't stress this enough, is just as bad for the Palestinians in Gaza as it is for Israel. Hamas in no way is doing anything good for the Palestinians in Gaza. Nothing. Not economically, not socially, nothing. When the leaders of Hamas are living in homes that look like, I wish I could afford a home like that, but the civilian population is living in the poverty that it's living in, there's a problem. And I understand that the civilian population does not have the strength to be able to go up against a terror organization like that. And I feel for them, I do. And I hope and pray and every day that I get up and I open my eyes, I say maybe today is going to be the day that they're going to get rid of them, and finally something can happen positively in Gaza. Until then, you ask about, Israel says they know where every bullet lands. Yes, you can say that. I'm an IDF sergeant. I know, I understand the mindset. We are very cautious about what happens. But the same way that we're cautious about what happens, on the flip side, there are tricks in which to, let me ask you this, are you of the belief that Hamas sometimes uses the deaths that happen in Gaza as propaganda that pushes them, kind of raises them up? Sure. So when someone dies in Gaza, for example, do you believe that Hamas, if somebody is killed by an Israeli, do you believe that Hamas uses this death, whether it's a civilian death or not a civilian death? Do you believe that they use it for something to say, to propagate their message?
Okay, I just want to point out that I'm not here to defend Hamas, and I asked you about the civilian lives.
Sure.
And I don't feel like you answered that question. But to answer your question.
Yeah. I'll get to that.
You're calling it propaganda, that they're using it as propaganda for resistance. However, it is what is happening, and they are justifying the resistance movement. But I'm not here to defend Hamas, but I'm just wondering, why are you calling it propaganda?
Well, the reason that I was asking you that question was because it is, this is a well-known fact, is that Hamas uses deaths that happen in Gaza. I don't know how else to say this to you other than to say that they champion the fact that deaths happen in Gaza because on the world stage, that makes their cause seem like it's more legitimate, that Israel is killing civilians. The idea of human shield is not an idea that came up, in the last year, in the last 2 years. This is something, a tactic that Hamas has used and has admittedly, on camera, said that they do because it propagates their message. It gives the world the way to look at what's happening in Gaza as the poor civilians who are dying. That doesn't make the civilians' death any less tragic. They're just as tragic, if not more so, because their own government is putting them in a position to do that. When you look at, and I'll talk about the civilians now, when you look at what happened in the summer, and you talked about, I think there were 61 Palestinians who were killed in one day during the march, the Great March of, one of the Great March of Returns on the Friday. It turned out in the end, and this is a videotape that was done by Hamas to a Palestinian news station, they admitted that 55 of the 61 were actually Hamas operatives working themselves into the civilian community so that they would either be hidden or that Israel would actually kill more civilians. How does Israel work around that? It's hard. It's a horrible, horrible, gut-wrenching thing to feel like you don't know that person on the other side. Is he wearing a press vest because he's press? Is he throwing that grenade even though he's a press, a journalist? How do you know 100%? And you can never know 100%. So, I understand that they said they know where every bullet lands, and we aim for that every single time. Every single time. Nobody wants a civilian life. Nobody, well, on the Israeli side, no Israeli wants a civilian life lost. I can say that to you wholeheartedly. I say that to you from me. I can say that to you from every person that I've ever served with. So that said, I know 100% that there are a lot more extremists on the right, the same way that Hamas has, their kind of extremists in the Jewish sector as well. I know this. I know that there are extremists on both sides. But I have to implore you to understand, and whether or not you want to accept it or not, is that Israel is not aiming to hurt civilians, There is no gain for Israel to make in hurting a civilian. We do the best we can. We try the best we can. We hope that Gaza turns into what it was promised to be, which was the Singapore of the Middle East, is what it was supposed to be. It didn't turn into that because of the stronghold, the choking stronghold that Hamas has. How do we solve the issue of less civilian lives being lost? Gaza is a very populated, condensed, as you know, a very populated and condensed area. When you are launching rockets from within a home, when you are, in Protective Edge, we found rocket launchers hidden in babies' bedrooms in homes, so that Israel didn't know what was inside the home.
Hospitals and schools.
Hospitals and schools, in mosques, in all these humanitarian places. It's a horrible thing to do.
It can only be seen as intentional.
Of course it's intentional.
Yeah.
It's intentional, and that's where I go back to, and that's why I brought up Hamas when you were talking about the civilian populations, because Hamas is a terror organization for Gazans as much as it is a terror organization for Israelis. They are looking to kill Gazans as much as they are looking to kill Israelis. And I refuse to accept anybody who says to me they're a legitimate government. If you are a legitimate government, have an election. Let your people choose if they want you to be there. Until then, you are lobbing rockets indiscriminately at Israel, and a lot of them are falling back in Gaza because they're not aimed correctly. So you're killing Palestinians as well. You're a terror organization through and through. So to sum it all up again, civilian lives, every civilian life lost is a tragedy, every single one. And I hope and I pray one day that I don't know how, maybe with Arab support from other states, Hamas is rooted and eradicated out of there so that Palestinians can thrive and be the people that they should be.
Yeah, it's so painful.
It's
so painful.
I'm getting upset now because I feel for them, and where I come from is right on the, not on the border, but it's where the rockets fall. My family, all night last night, yesterday I was in Glasgow and I was speaking, and the rockets were falling. My phone would not stop because I have the red alert on my phone still. The rockets would not stop. And as terrified as I was being here while I was hearing it, I knew my family and I was speaking to them. They were calling me from within the shelters. I know that in Gaza, there are families and there are children who are terrified. We have to be able to take out a terror organization and legitimize them and say, no, no longer. We are going to give the people a democratically elected government that is fair and that changes, like I say, should only be a certain amount of term and be able to change it. And once that's been taken out and international aid starts to go to infrastructure and schools and education instead of being stolen by Hamas to use to buy rockets from Iran, we're already looking at something better.
Yeah. Sorry, no, we need to go to someone else. I'm so sorry.
But I'll be around after. You can.
Yeah. Okay. So a final question.
So yeah, this was just about your point about Israel as a kind of LGBT haven in the Middle East. For a lot of Palestinian queers don't consider themselves to be safe on with Israeli policy as well. So the director of ASWAT, which is a support group for Palestinian lesbians, says that
So where is this group in
this
Gaza?
group is in Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv, okay.
Yeah. So this group in Tel Aviv basically says that Palestinian gays, and this is the account of people who've come out of Gaza and places like that, and they say that they are sometimes targeted by the Israeli Secret Service and told that they must collaborate or they will be outed by the Israeli Secret Service.
Okay.
There's another group called Palestinian Queers for BDS who their argument essentially is that it's so interlinked, the idea of a society that's under siege and the kind of not having your rights as an LGBT person, because when your society isn't allowed to develop, such as being under occupation like in Gaza, you don't get the chance, your society doesn't get the chance to evolve like other society has into societies with LGBT rights. And honestly, like, I am also LGBT, and it doesn't sit right with me that the movement is being harnessed in this way by Israel as a kind of propaganda tool against Palestinians. When Palestinian...
Sorry, what movement is being...
The LGBT movement, like, I think you may have heard of the term pinkwashing.
Oh, I have, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that sort of thing. And I just wondered how you'd respond to that when there's so many Palestinian, like, LGBT Palestinians who feel like this issue is so interlinked, and how you can justify kind of silencing their voices.
So I will start to say, but I don't silence anybody's voice. I am open and hope that people speak and people say what they want to say, and I hope that came through in what I was saying to you guys today. I will also say that the term pinkwashing, as an LGBT who lived at a time in Israel when LGBT rights were not, and championed the movement and fought for and walked in the first and marched in the first and brought in many ways the LGBT movement to where we are today in Israel, the term pinkwashing is so completely offensive to me that I don't even know how to explain it to you. I lived in a time when I couldn't be open about who I was. I lived in a time where I had to be secretive with my family about who I was. I was the one who marched in that very first parade. I championed and worked so hard to bring Israeli rights to where they are today. Are we perfect? No. But when we talk about pinkwashing, basically what pinkwashing says is, everything that I've done, everything that I've fought for, all the work that I've done, basically I did it so that I could hide something else that's happening. And there's nothing more offensive to me than to hear that, because I don't think that kind of discussing LGBT rights and the progress that Israel has made, albeit not perfect, the progress that Israel has made somehow should deter or hide or put Palestinian issues behind some sort of a screen. That's not at all what Israel is doing. Israel should be proud of its LGBT community. Of course it should. And what pinkwashing is saying is you're really not proud of them. You're just using it because of another issue. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. Israel the modern state of Israel is only 70 years old. And sometimes I like to give, the analogy of, think about any other country at 70 years old. Where were they at 70 years old? Now, granted, a lot of these countries we're talking years back, and it was a different time in the world. But there are certain countries around us who are the same age as us. Like, look at Jordan, look at Pakistan, look at all these other places where these countries at 70 years old as we are so far behind where we are. And not to say that, let's not look at Israel because of other people, but we also have to understand that it takes time to be able to be perfect in what it is that you're doing. I still don't know, none. A country exists today that is completely perfect. Even the most socially aware country, or they agree or believe themselves to be, Sweden, still has issues with social issues with certain minorities, and it's never going to be perfect because we're human beings. Do I want to silence I apologize, I don't know that movement that you were talking about, but I'll definitely look into it after I leave here. I have worked with many LGBT groups in Israel, many of them who are extremely left-leaning. In fact, I've worked for the Aguda, which is the kind of like the LGBT, I don't know what union, I guess it would be. And we have many Palestinian members who are grateful that the first place that they could go to that accepted them and opened their door to them because of who they were was Israel. Is that 100% the case? I don't know anything that's 100% the case. Do I think that possibly what you were saying is true, that there are certain security things that they say, well, if you know something, we're going to use this against you? I would not discount it. I'm not saying that things like that can't happen. What I'm saying is we have to look at a case by case, like what you were talking about, but we also have to look at something in kind of a global, general kind of almost like a broader sense. And the broader sense is, in no uncertain terms, Israel is a safe haven for LGBT communities in the Middle East. It just is. There are, and like I say, Lebanese gay people, LGBT people who are in Israel. There are Arab, Palestinian LGBTQ people who are in Israel. There are security factors that you were talking about that is completely separate, and I don't know that story that you're talking about, so I'd have to look into it. I would ask you, though, to not discount everything that Israel has done, everything that I've done for the LGBT community, simply to say, do you know what I mean?
I'm not at all
I appreciate that.
What you've done for Israeli LGBT rights are not at all. But what I'm saying is, I feel that maybe those rights, not by you and not by certain Israeli civilians or whatever, but certain parts of the government, for instance, and the intelligence service and the military. I don't think you can present Israel as a kind of LGBT friendly place just when the military kind of puts LGBT people at risk in this manner.
You know, you're kind of talking about scenarios that we really don't know what the full. I don't know. You would have to say to me, this is the scenario, these are the facts, these are whatever. You're giving me kind of broad security the army uses. I was LGBT open, by the way, in 1996 when I came out in the army. Don't ask, don't tell. I came out just before it just happened, so it was completely open. The way that I came out, it's a funny story actually. When you come back to the army each Sunday morning, you come back to the army and all the guys are like talking about all the girls that they met over the weekend, and I met this one and I went out with this one, and I was always like that quiet person. And I'm like, well, you're not saying anything, and I thought, I didn't go out this weekend. I was with my family. I was doing whatever, but. It came to a point when there was a point in 1996 that I missed a bus by this much. I was supposed to get on that bus to go to the base, and I missed it by literally almost 10 seconds, and that bus blew up in front of me. And it was something that resonated with me so much that I felt at that point I needed to be honest with my unit, my brothers, and they were people who supported me in what we talk about brothers in arms or whatever, however you want to say it. There's a certain camaraderie that you have when you're in any military, and I thought, you know what, it's time for me to tell them. I was so scared because I was in a combat unit. I was so scared about coming out to them. I thought they were going to excommunicate me, they were going to kick me out, they were going to, I don't know what they were going to do to me, if not worse, because you just think that the worst of worst. And I remember when I came back that Sunday, they were all talking about, I met this one and I went to this club and I met this girl and everything. So Shai, okay, already it's been 4 months already. How come you never tell us a story about some girl that you met? And I just looked at them and I was like, okay guys, I have something to tell you. I was like, I'm gay. So it was quiet for all of 3 seconds, and then the next question was, well, did you meet any guys this weekend, or did you go out with any guys this week? It was like not a thing at all. So what I'm saying to you is, can I say 100% that what you're saying is not true? I don't know, because I don't know the story that you're talking about. Do I think that there's room for improvement? Yeah, of course. And I hope that the same way there are Palestinians who live in Israel and are openly LGBT and are proud of the fact that they are now able to live in Israel as an openly LGBT person, I hope that one day all those people who feel like they need to and can.
Just a final point I want to ask you, and I think this would be a nice way to close.
Sure.
One of the points that I try to make as someone that considers himself to be a Zionist and pro-Israel, is I say I also consider myself to be pro-Palestinian, in that
100%.
I want there to be peace between two nations coexisting. If that's the way we can create peace and dignity for all, I want it to be. If that's the way we're going to do it,
one should never discount the other.
Absolutely, let there be a Palestinian state. What's the problem is when you have people who are anti-Israel.
Yes.
Or anti-Palestinian,
Correct.
right? That's where the problem is. And so my question is, this is ultimately, this is on JTV, and this is for largely the viewers watching it will be people that are Zionists. What would you say are things that we can do on our end to try and help move the process along and
the peace process.
The peace process, and also, what can we do to improve the lot of the average Palestinian's life?
You know, I think that the young lady who was just speaking now was speaking about that LGBT group. You were talking about the LGBT group in Tel Aviv that champions rights for LGBT women in the territories and in Gaza. And I think that, you know, there's many social things that we can do. You know, our government... I'm sorry?
Grassroots.
The grassroots stuff. I mean, you know, there are so many amazing organizations in Israel that are so... embedded in the desire and work hard every day to bridge the gap between Palestinians and Israelis. I mean, when I was there this past summer, we took the group to the Shimon Peres Center, the Peace Center in Jaffa, which is this amazing center, obviously named after Shimon Peres, who was a huge champion of bridging that gap. I met Palestinians, I met Israelis, I met Jews, I met Christians, I met Muslims. It didn't matter. It was, everybody was there. Everybody was there as an Israeli citizen, even though they were, you know, whatever they were. The Palestinians who considered themselves to be Palestinian but were Israeli citizens were the ones who surprised me the most. I mean, I don't know what I expected, but I certainly didn't expect the outpouring of gratitude that I got from them specifically, saying that, you know, we need more moderate voices like myself. And I think that that's important. I think that if we try to stop being so this or this and more of this, more centralized, I think that we're going to do ourselves a great service. I think that the minute that you start polarizing things, you're always going to lose. Always. The minute you can kind of bring things together and kind of meet somewhere in the middle, you might not agree 100% on everything as you're walking down that path in the middle, but at least you're together. At least you're working at it together. And I think that if we can somehow, you know, in university campuses across the world, if we can have these student groups, rather than try to silence the Israeli groups, or the Israeli groups trying to silence the other way. The horrible things that are happening on university campuses now, which is why I started to work with Camera on Campus, is just mind-boggling to me. Why would you want to silence one side if you're really trying to create a compromise and to create a bridge? We have to listen to both sides. We have to be able to meet in the middle. We might not always agree, like I say, but at least if we're walking that same middle path, we can talk about it rather than being here and being here.
I think that's a really nice note to finish on. Shai, Tamasi, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
To stay up to date with the latest JTV content, if you're on YouTube, click subscribe below the video and the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, click the like button, and under following, click see first.